make this work, we need policy harmonization across the board, as proposed by the Make Africa Borderless Now campaign's 12 action priority points. This is the core of this webinar. This is the mission of the Make Africa Borderless Now campaign. Now, Princess Fathia, my colleague here, and one of the continent's brilliant actors, says we need to have the appropriate systems to go with this vision. We need to have good infrastructure, because we've got the talent. But the infrastructure, she says, is long overdue. So let us build a borderless creative economy and mobilize young Africans behind this movement. And today is the right day to talk about it, because it's the International Youth Day, isn't it?
It most certainly is. Thank you so very much, Prince Moses. I think you've given us a brilliant foundation for today's webinar, because when we talk about a borderless Africa, it can sometimes sound like a very ambitious policy that most people can't seem to wrap their head around. But for young people at the heart of today's conversation, it's much more immediate. Now, the thinking behind the Make Africa Borderless Now campaign is that the culture has already crossed the border, but now we need to make the opportunity also cross the border. It's about moving beyond simply talking about African integration and asking, what would it take to make that integration tangible in everyday lives and the businesses of Africans, but particularly today, our young people. Today's program will explore the infrastructure, as Prince so brilliantly put it, that makes that possible, whether it's the payments, the platforms, regulation, intellectual property, mobility, finance, and access to markets. But before we get into that conversation, let's take a moment to see the vision behind the movement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the launch video for Make Africa Borderless Now.
In Accra, during the Africa Prosperity Dialogues, delegates from across the continent and the diaspora came together for the Africa Prosperity Dialogues 2026. They met to empower SMEs, women, and youth to make Africa borderless now.
We must begin to think of ourselves as Africans, not as Ghanaians, South Africans, Ethiopians.
Even though I'd been paid to perform, I was stopped at the border.
When Africans tried to pay Africans across borders, currencies detoured.
When Africa stood at the crossroads of integration, we did not hesitate. We chose action.
Play your part. It can be done. It must be done. We must have a borderless Africa.
Sign the petition. We want a borderless Africa now.
Africa's prosperity lies in its unity, in its oneness. Many treaties have been signed, but now it's time for execution and action. Sign the petition now at makeafricaborderlessnow.com. Let's build a new future for Africa, one signature at a time.
Absolutely brilliant. I was lucky enough to be able to participate in this year's Africa Prosperity Dialogues, where we officially launched the Make Africa Borderless Now campaign. And if you're listening, if you're participating in this webinar today and you haven't yet signed the petition, please, please, please do so. Now we're going to go right into our panel discussions for the day. Now that we've seen the vision in our Make Africa Borderless Now launch video, I think that it's time for us to really understand this future that we're trying to build. And as with most things, sometimes that has to start with policy. Our first panel discussion for the day is building the market, payments, platforms, rights, and AFCFTA. Once again, I would like to welcome our moderator for this panel, Prince Moses, to the stage, and his panelists, who are a group of policymakers and people who are involved in the industry at a level that we will be discussing here today. Our very first panelist is Head of Business Development at the Pan-African Payment and Settlement Systems, PAPS. She is in the person of Miss Gloria Atanga. Our second panelist, Miss Adi Awofisayo, is a creative economist strategist with over 15 years of global experience. And last, but certainly not least, is Miss Ilamosi Ekenimo, Manager, Global Regulatory and Public Policy Programs at Flutterwave. Ladies and gentlemen, our very first session.
Thank you very much, Princess. So we will be going to our first session, but I'm told that two of our panelists are yet to join. They actually dropped off. So I think we'll go for a musical interlude and come back as soon as we're done.
Africa is far from being poor. It is Africans who are poor, not Africa. And they are poor because of the uncounted profit that has been made out of the exploitation of their labor.
Well then, a big fraud is assistant. We are tired of being the victims. After your faraway wars, tear down the Berlin walls. Make us up, don't bother with them bother. Africa is free forever. Trade free, move free. My sister, my brother. We don't need no visa from north to the south. Take the train from the east to the west. Direct flight from Accra to Kingston. 5G internet, no matter where we live. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe? I believe in Africa. Said I believe. True unification. We are the biggest single market. Saying no more to the colonial racket. They don't care, they never will fair. Let's come together and grab our share. Join the fast track to prosperity. We want food and energy security till eternity. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe? I believe in Africa. Say I believe.
Africa is far from people. It is Africans who are poor, not Africa. And they are poor because of the uncounted profit that has been made out of the exploitation of their labor and their lives.
Well then, a big fraud is a system. We are tired of being the victims. After your faraway wars, tear down the Berlin walls. Make us up, don't bother with them batters. Africa is free forever. Trade free, move free. My sister, my brother. We don't need no visa from north to the south. Take the train from the east to the west. Direct flight from Accra to Kingston. 5G internet, no matter where we live. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe? I believe in Africa. Said I believe. I believe in Africa. Do you believe it? Watch out them. All Africa. Ghana. Nigeria. Congo. Tanzania. Egypt. Guyana. South Africa. Oh, no dollarization. True unification. We are the biggest single market. Say no more to the colonial racket. They don't care. They never will be fair. Let's come together and grab our share. Join the fast track to prosperity. We want food and energy security till eternity. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe? I believe in Africa. Say I believe. Oh, Mama Africa. 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 All Africa. Hey, Senegal. Côte d'Ivoire. Angola. Rwanda. Morocco. Barbados. Zimbabwe. Well, this is Africa's time. Let every clock shine. It's not about you, in spite of you. Africa will unite. Let these words sink in your head. Divide and rule is dead. All Africa, Ethiopia, Mali, Cameroon, Kenya, Tunisia, Haiti, Namibia, now. Oh, let's all come together, Oh, Africa, all Africa,
Africa is far from people. It is Africans who are poor, not Africa. And they are poor because of the uncounted profit that has been made out of the exploitation of their labor and their lives.
Well then, a big fraud is a system. We are tired of being the victims. After your faraway wars, tear down the Berlin walls. Make us up, don't bother with them batters. Africa is free forever. Trade free, move free. My sister, my brother. We don't need no visa from north to the south. Take the train from the east to the west. Direct flight from Accra to Kingston. 5G internet, no matter where we live. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe?
What a beautiful, beautiful song. I remember the first time I heard that at the Africa Prosperity Dialogue 2026. And if you're part of this discussion today, if you're watching us anywhere from around the world, I'm sure that you too believe in Africa. I'm so sorry for the extended break, but we're finally back and we will be going right into the discussion with Prince Moses and the head of business. Prince Moses.
Yes. So we boast of the talent in Africa. We know the potential, but talent alone does not build a market. Consider what happens when an African creator gets an audience in another African country. The opportunity is there, but then come the practical questions. How do they get paid? How does the content travel? Who protects the rights? Most of us have seen building blocks emerge, interoperable payments, digital platforms, audiences that ignore borders. But can we connect these pieces into a market that works? Today we have with us Gloria Atanga, Head of Business Development of PAPS. We will also be speaking to Adi Aufisayo, Creative Economist, Economic Strategist, as it were. And then we have also Ilamosi Ekinemo, Manager, Global Regulatory and Public Policy Programs at Flutterwave. Let's begin with Gloria. We'll engage Gloria a bit. Hi, Gloria. How are you? Is Gloria on? Well, I think we're still having some technical difficulties. We will come back to Gloria in a bit. For the time being, let's please listen to some messages.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, Gloria, you're on. I can hear you loud and clear. Yes, so shall we begin with the first question? Gloria, you're Head of Business Development at PAPS. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And so the first question is really about payment barriers. So for many African creators, getting paid across borders can still be expensive, slow and complicated. From the Pan-African payments and settlement systems perspective, what are some of the biggest payment barriers facing creative businesses today, and how is PAPS changing that experience?
All right, thank you very much for that question. And indeed, it helps us to set the context that would enable us to understand the pertinence of PAPS eventually. There are a number of challenges when it comes to cross-border payments in Africa in particular. And one of the challenges I would highlight first and foremost is the interoperability. The interoperability means that the payment systems we have built in countries does not speak with the other payment systems outside of our country. And so one of the challenges that PAPS addresses is that problem of interoperability. PAPS is the first continental payment system that would allow the existing regional and national payment systems to communicate with one another, and therefore it becomes much easier for a customer to initiate a payment from Ghana to Kenya or from Zimbabwe to Tanzania, simply because all of this ecosystem is built on the PAPS infrastructure where they speak the common language. So we resolve the challenge of interoperability that speaks to the fragmented payment landscape in Africa. On top of interoperability, we can look at the actual efficiency when it comes to doing those payments. One of the challenges that PAPS addresses is that of speed. Today, primarily, we still heavily rely on a network of financial intermediaries to be able to process our cross-border payments. And so with PAPS, we're saying that all the transactions that you're initiating are processed in our infrastructure, and that enables us to terminate those transactions within a maximum of 120 seconds. And of course, 120 is the maximum, but today we are happy to report that we process all these cross-border payments in an average of 7 to 10 seconds. So regardless of the amount that you're initiating on our system, it is processed instantly. And that's because the system is built to be an instant payment system. So with PAPS, we bring an end to the prolonged delays or to the financial intermediaries that increase the transaction costs, which takes me to the next challenge that PAPS addresses, the actual cost of transactions. It's important to highlight that what makes cross-border payments expensive is in reality the amount of financial intermediaries that are involved in those transactions. If you're sending a payment between, let me say, Nigeria to Ghana, then your payment would most likely transit through at least 1 to 2 correspondent banks that would convert your local currency, which is the Naira, into the cedi. And so what we are saying with PAPS is that because we've built a single infrastructure where all of these participants are connected, then we remove the intermediaries and therefore we reduce the overall cost of the transactions. It's also worth highlighting that it's a deliberate policy at PAPS to offer low-cost transactions. PAPS was designed by the African Export-Import Bank specifically to support the implementation of the AfCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And that's the flagship project of the African Union that aims to create the largest continental market for goods and services across the world. Now, if you want to have a single continental market, it's important for you to have a single continental payment system. So our deliberate policy to reduce transaction costs on PAPS actually aims to stimulate the volume of intra-African payments and therefore stimulate the or increase intra-African trade among countries, which today is one of the lowest across borders. Of course, there are a number of challenges that we can speak to when it comes to cross-border payments, but I think at a very high level, I can limit it to those three challenges, which definitely, once addressed by PAPS, would demonstrate a significant change in the way that our customers are able to process these cross-border payments.
So, Gloria, I think PAPS is in about 21 countries, and I understand you are working with the Caribbean countries to have them plugged into the system. I also know that of the 21 countries that are part of the PAPS program, we hardly have any Francophone countries. That might also be because they have their own system. I think their system, they have a digital platform that was launched somewhere in June this year, and which would enable them, plug into PAPS as a group. But really, the question is, how can PAPS enable a creative enterprise in Accra, for instance, to operate more easily across multiple African markets? I have given you the example of the Francophone region. So you might want to walk us through some of these complex frameworks, break them down for us to understand.
All right. No, thank you very much for that question. That also gives me the opportunity to share favorable updates on PAPS with our audience. The first thing to note is that the 21 countries you're referring to probably speaks to the number of central banks we have on PAPS, because typically for PAPS to be deployed in a country is done through the membership of the central banks. So while we have 21 central banks on PAPS, we actually have 28 countries available on the system. And the reason why we have 28 is indeed because PAPS recently signed up the Bank of Central African States, which enables PAPS to be deployed across the 6 countries in Central Africa. So the Francophone regions are typically characterized by their regional central banks. You have one for Central Africa that covers 6 countries, and you have one for West Africa, Francophone West Africa, that covers 8 countries. So with the membership of BEAC on PAPS, we have 21 central banks, but many more countries available, given that it's a regional central bank. And therefore, BEAC is our first Francophone central bank to join the system, which also shows the commendable progress, I would like to say, we are making in our deployment across Africa. Now, that speaks to Central Africa. The other good news we are happy to share is that when it comes to Francophone West Africa, so the 8 other countries covered by their regional bank, which is BCIO, will also be available on PAPS in the course of this quarter, hopefully, because we have entered into an agreement with the central bank in order to do a pilot of PAPS in those 8 countries. So the central bank has accepted for PAPS to deploy its system across the 8 countries in order to see the viability or the value added of PAPS in the region. So what that means in essence is that within this quarter, we should be able to open the corridors of all the Francophone countries across Africa, covering both Central Africa and also Francophone West Africa.
What about the Caribbean, Gloria? What about the Caribbean? Because I know that a lot of our creatives are interested in collaboration with the Caribbean countries, which are considered, or the Caribbean region, which is considered to be the 6th region of Africa. So it would make sense to have these artistic, creative collaborations, but we need the framework, the system like PAPS to be able to have that communication between the 6th region and the rest of Africa.
Absolutely. We are getting a lot of excitement from the Caribbean, and it's an excitement that has been there, let me say, over the last 2 to 3 years, at least as far as Afreximbank organized one of its annual general meetings in the Bahamas, where we could actually feel the excitement from all the Caribbean countries. So what we're doing in the Caribbean is a slightly different approach, because we are working with the central banks in the Caribbean in order to develop their own version of PAPS. So like PAPS is the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, you would also have a Caribbean payment and settlement system. So that's the idea, to be able to have a payment system that would allow seamless payments first among those Caribbean payments, and then we would interlink the 2 payment systems in order to fluidify the flows between the Caribbean and Africa.
So I see what you're doing here. So you have all these sub-regional systems plugging into PAPS. We've had the 21 countries from the mostly English-speaking countries and perhaps the Lusophones. And then we've got the Central African Francophone countries who are also now linking into PAPS. And then the 8 countries in the West African Francophone region preparing to plug into PAPS. And then you're talking about the Caribbean region having their own system and also eventually plugging into PAPS. But really, the question is, how do we enable the creative enterprise to operate more easily across these multiple African markets?
Okay, there are a number of ways we can enable that. Let me be as practical as possible. And as we speak today, PAPS is a financial market infrastructure, which means that we deal with the payments end to end, from the initiation through the funding until the settlement of the transaction. Now, what that means for the end customer is that today you're able to leverage PAPS through our participants. So if you want to do a PAPS transaction as we speak today, you're not going to come to PAPS directly. You're either going to go to your commercial bank that is connected to PAPS, or you're going to leverage the connectivity provided by a payment service provider. It could be a fintech, a mobile money operator, or money transfer operator. So you can use PAPS through those intermediaries or those participants that are members of our network. Another way through which, as an end customer, you can leverage PAPS is through our web payment gateway. If you want to make payments online, then you would definitely have PAPS as one of the options. Today you have a number of payment solutions that are quite standard across online payments. So we also have a web payment gateway that would enable you to do this cross-border payment. And of course, that speaks particularly to e-commerce.
Please go ahead, yes.
And a number of other small and medium-sized enterprises. So I think the long and short of what I'm trying to highlight is that when we talk about PAPS, we talk about an ecosystem in which we develop various solutions that enable our participants or our end users to be able to make those transactions seamlessly. Last thing to note, because we've spoken about PAPS in Africa, we've spoken about PAPS in the Caribbean, it's important to note that the horizon of PAPS is worldwide. We understand that Africa does not trade only with itself, and so it's important for PAPS to be understood as the trusted payment gateway for payments from Africa to the rest of the world, and also for payments from the rest of the world into Africa. And so in that regard, we have a number of partnerships that we are working on with global payment systems to be able to allow transactions from all over the world to be processed through PAPS as long as they relate to Africa in one way or the other.
Okay, wonderful. So the thing about PAPS is you have your currency, you should be able to buy in another country without necessarily changing your money to dollar or to the euro or to the pound and losing value. You can do it directly with your local currency in digital form. So that's wonderful. We'll come back to you if we have some time for you to explain how, if this is only done through banks. I think you did explain a fair bit, or it's also retail, but I think we need more clarity on that. Next, I'm going to go to Ilamusi Ekinimo, who's Manager Global Regulatory and Public Policy Programs at Flutterwave. Hi, Ilamusi, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're very sorry for the delay. These things happen, so you'd really have to excuse us, and to all our listeners as well. Now, the first question is, the creative economy increasingly operates across borders, yet regulation remains largely national. This is a problem. How is Flutterwave helping to rectify this?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. As we all know, Flutterwave is a payments company and we help with cross-border payments and remittances. So our role really in this conversation is helping creators get paid and helping huge platforms like, for example, YouTube or Meta to be able to pay creators locally. So our role is to act as a payment rail to sort of ensure that the creators in Africa can get their slice of the global pie, I would say.
Okay, so what regulatory barriers are most constraining cross-border creatives across Africa, and what reforms are needed to build trusted, interoperable digital markets?
I would first, in response to that question, ask how much time we have here today.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that maybe, there are large blockages, not anymore. I would say what we have, or where we're noticing, is an accumulation of small frictions. So I'll give you a practical example. Let's say you are a YouTube creator in Kenya and you want to get paid, you monetize your channel is doing well. The question then is, how do you get paid? So I'll walk you through what the process would look like and why I say it's an accumulation of small frictions. So for example, many huge platforms like YouTube, for example, pay in a limited set of currencies. So whether that is typically USD, right? So what that means is that you have two ways of receiving your money if you're a creator. You get paid in USD, or that's open a domiciliary account, or you have a local account and then YouTube sends the money to you somehow, then the money is converted into local currency and deposited into your account. So the very first issue we have really is the currency conversion issue, because there is a problem of liquidity. So I'll try not to get too technical, but I'll break it down. If you are an operator, for example, if you're a YouTuber in Nigeria, then Naira is the currency, right? If you get paid in USD, there is only a fixed amount of USD in circulation in Nigeria at any given time. So for example, let's say there's 1 million USD in circulation in Nigeria today, and you get paid today and you get paid 500 USD. This is just an example, by the way. If you're trying to get your money out and there are other people maybe ahead of you in the queue, or maybe more important transactions that sort of need that volume, then the 1 million USD is gone, which means that even though you have money, you technically cannot access it until maybe tomorrow when there's another 1 million USD for you to pull from. So there's the liquidity problem. That's the maybe second barrier that you face.
Is this not what PAPS is trying to solve?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you'll have to unpack. You'll have to unpack the technicalities for us,
Okay.
if it's more complex than I'm making it sound.
I mean, no, thankfully Gloria is here, so I'm in very good company. But yes, PAPS does solve this, right? What PAPS does is that it makes, how do I say it? It makes countries or currencies speaking to each other better, right? So imagine, let's say Flutterwave is a payment rail. If you want to send money from Nigeria to the USA, Flutterwave provides the rail so that the money can go across borders. What PAPS does is that PAPS is like Grand Central Station. So PAPS is where all the currencies meet and they speak and say, okay, maybe how much Kenyan shillings do you need? How much Naira do you need? How much cedis do you need? Okay, I have 5 cedis and I need 5 Naira. Okay, let's exchange. That's what PAPS does. But even for these exchanges to happen, you still have to have liquidity, FX liquidity, foreign liquidity in your country. So PAPS provides the platform to do the exchanges. It doesn't provide the money itself.
Is that not why we call it swap? Because then the central banks would hold the local currencies until there is liquidity to have it swapped back.
Yes, but that also has economic implications, because how much USD does the central bank want to hold, for example? And there are thresholds that we can get to before it starts affecting the economy. So it's a very delicate balance that we're trying to strike. The CBN, for example, the Central Bank of Nigeria, cannot hold an infinite amount of dollars. There needs to be Naira in circulation and there needs to be dollars in circulation. So the amounts that are available to the public at any given time have to be regulated. It can't be an unlimited amount, right? So because of these delicate technicalities, I would say, is why we're having the problems we're having today. If we had as much FX inflow as we wanted, and as much, for example, Naira outflow as we wanted, then there's more liquidity. But if you have a situation where, for example, more money is coming in and less money is coming out, what that means is that there's high demand, but there's low supply. So money is coming in, but then there's money going out. And if we keep allowing money in without getting money out, the economy is going to collapse.
So my final question, bringing it down to tomatoes and onions, yeah? A creative is selling some wonderful designs that she or he has made, from Lagos to Nairobi, and payment has to be done. Right, we have this system across the continent. I think MTN is doing a fantastic job with the Momo system, and it comes with several interoperable possibilities. So you can go to your bank and then have it transferred to your Momo account and then to the person if the person is on the Momo wallet. And this is what we're asking, if we can have the same thing across Africa. And I think Flutterwave is doing that as well. Is there a possibility for someone to have that same mechanism on Flutterwave? Let's say you have your local currency, you use Flutterwave, you're selling something, you're buying something from another country, from another capital. Is there that possibility of using your Flutterwave, let's say, system to buy immediately from whether or not you have a problem with your FX? Is there a possibility of a small entrepreneur or a small creative to be able to buy a concert ticket, to buy a design, to buy furniture from another country without the hassle?
Yes, so that's, I mean, the short and long answer is yes. And that's one of the things that we are trying to make more efficient. And thank God there are so many fintechs working on this one issue. So Flutterwave has a product called multi-currency accounts. What that means is that you can open an account and hold multiple currencies within that account, trade with those multiple currencies within that account. So for example, if I put in USD and I'm in Nigeria and I need to make a payment, in Naira, I can pull from that multi-currency account to make the payments and the payments will go. So because of the FX liquidity issue, and because obviously systems in Africa are not perfect, we try to make sure that these transactions are completed within seconds, but worst case scenario, a couple of minutes, and the transaction typically goes through. So yes, there are ways to do that. And fintechs really simplify the process. So rather than going to, for example, a Western Union or having to go to a bank physically, if you download the app, if you download our app or really any other fintech app that does the same thing, then you should be able to do that quite seamlessly.
Yeah, and the fact that we spend about $5 billion just trading among ourselves using other people's currencies just jars me. And this is why I'm really, really happy about the PAPS mechanism. I'm happy that Flutterwave is working or has plugged it into the PAP system for us to be able to trade among ourselves more directly. Is Adi here? Adi, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So Adi Awofisayo is creative economy strategist. She's very well versed in everything creative in terms of the platforms that bring the visibility to these creatives. Now, my first question is, African creators can now reach global audiences, but audience does not always translate into sustainable income. Where is the biggest gap between visibility and value?
Yeah, no, thanks. And thanks for having me in such a full room here. So I'm excited to join everyone. Okay, so this is a topic that I think there's some myths that we need to bust a little bit, because people always say, oh, if I'm a creator from Africa, I cannot earn as much as creators in the developed markets like the US or the UK. Which, that statement alone is false, right? And why is it false? It's not a matter of the income that you can earn, right? It's the matter of the viewership that you have on your channel. So in terms of the gap, obviously, if you're creating content for an African audience on the continent, you will have the eyeballs of the African continent. And when you now talk about the advertising dollars on the continent is not yet as robust as the US, for instance, or the UK. And so you are sharing from the pie of the advertising dollars on the continent. However, if you're a creator that is creating content from the continent, but a lot of your viewership is from the US, then guess what? You are actually tapping into the advertising dollars in the US. And that's why you would see, two creators who are creating content from Nigeria. One has an audience viewership where 70% is outside the continent, let's say from the US and the UK, whereas the other 70% is from from the continent. Well, the creator that's earning that has viewership from the US and the UK is going to earn more, even though they're both creating from Nigeria. That creator is going to earn more because the eyeballs is from the US, and so the advertising dollars that they can access is from the US. I think the gap that we have here is, one, we need to get more users on the platform, right? And in order to get more users, you need to have access to internet. I know we've talked about APN and the telcos, we have that. The more, the data cost is low, the more there's ease of access to the internet, the more we'll have people online. And then the more people online, that translates into advertising dollars because the brands will then want to capture those eyeballs. Right now in Africa, TV and radio and out of home are still king when it comes to advertising dollars for the big brands. I mean, it is shifting. They are, moving their dollars to digital, but in terms of the eyeballs, it's still the traditional means. So until, we have more users on the platform and we have more advertising dollars, move to digital, then we're going to see the creators on the continent who are creating for audiences on the continent earn more.
All right, so that's quite interesting. So I'm understanding that it works a bit like AdSense, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right then. So for those of you who've been in the creative industry, especially the digital one, for a long time, this works basically like AdSense. And so I have another question for you. Digital platforms, okay, let's go to this. Straight to the point. What should government platforms and industry leaders prioritize to help African creators move beyond national markets and participate fully in a single continental creative industry? I know that the AFCFTA has the, its digital protocol well fired up, but would you say there are some shortcomings that need to be addressed by policy?
I think I would say the first one is access to data, and low cost of data. India is a great case study where Reliance Jio, which is kind of like the MTN over there, decided, they were going to crash the price of data on their network. They were going to make it as cheap as, it can be for the woman on the street who's selling something, because they wanted to get as many Indians online, because they knew that as many Indians come online, hopefully their network would be the preferred network. And when they did that, that also affected other, telco providers in the country. And then, the government also helped with making sure that companies can maintain the prices that they've lowered. And that saw a huge boom of Indians who came on digital. And when Africa, which is a huge continent, I think if we can get a lot of people online, we're going to see just incredible things happen, because more people can then access bigger audience. They can monetize that audience. And if they're monetizing and making money, that's employment for people. So I would say the biggest thing is probably just regulating data prices right now.
Yeah, I think Ghana did lower its data prices, I think somewhere last year or early this year, and that has allowed a lot of people to go online. But I have a question for you before we go to the others, Adi. So there is this gentleman who is a producer and a financier from the French Caribbean. He's based in Paris. His name is Pascal Million, and his question is, and I think you would be best suited to answer this question. It says, many African countries are not on YouTube's official list of eligible countries. Consequently, no paid advertisements can be activated, even with millions of local views. Is this true?
That is true.
So does this mean that one second, does it mean that there's
something on YouTube called
one second, does this mean that a creator from the Caribbean who is making content principally for Africa just might not be able to reach the entire continent. And this is problematic.
So no, that's not what that statement translates into. So I would use, let's say, Cameroon, because I think Cameroon is not on YPP, and maybe even Cote d'Ivoire. So YPP is YouTube's, it's called YouTube Partner Program, and that's how creators on YouTube are able to monetize their content. So YPP is not yet in every country in the world. It's in about 150, and they keep rolling out, subsequently. But there are some countries in Africa. I think in Africa, only about 13 countries have access to YPP, which means the creators in those markets are able to sign on to this program to monetize their content. So Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Senegal, I don't think Senegal is one of it. Some of these countries, only about 12. So if you're outside of the YPP market, just like Pascal is saying, you're not able to monetize your content unless your channel was open. Let's say you're in Rwanda, but you opened your channel while you were in Kenya. Well, you will be able to access YPP even though you're in Rwanda because your channel was opened in Kenya. But if you are in Rwanda and you opened your channel in Rwanda, you have to wait until YPP is accessible to creators in Rwanda. And YPP not being accessible in Rwanda is just a variety of reasons. The company, YouTube, decides how they roll out this monetization tool, which can vary from policy terms to post a lot of eligibility criteria that they look at to determine which countries get unlocked for YPP.
All right then. So this might not be a forte, but that's very briefly. It might not be a forte, but let's see if we can address this. I mean, the AFCFTA Digital Trade Protocol should address this. I mean, do you know if it addresses this?
I don't think it addresses it, but I think it's a conversation that they can start having with countries, because the more countries, I know, for instance, Rwanda, I was in Rwanda in May, and that was a huge topic for the creators in Rwanda, saying we need access to YPP. And so putting pressure on their government to raise these conversations with the technology platforms like Google, like YouTube, like Instagram, to open monetization in their country to allow them monetize their content. So I think it's something that the network can start having those conversations with the government, which in then would have conversations with the technology platforms. And I think the more, countries advocate to say, hey, we are ready for YPP in our market, what is needed, you will get the attention. I think, Rwanda's government, for instance, I think there was a viral a clip of the President Kagame, and the creator talking about why some platforms were not monetized in the country. And because of that, TikTok has now, enabled different monetization tools in the country. So I think, there's a role to play there.
Right. Oh, so thank you very much. I think this first session is over, but please, all three of you, do not go. Stay with us, because Princess Fathia, would have some more questions for you from the audience. I will yield to you, Princess.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prince Moses, for such a brilliant first session. I think that what this conversation has really highlighted today is that the challenge for African creators is not exactly a lack of access to a global audience, but more than that, it is the infrastructure. It is the friction between currency conversion, liquidity, cross-border payments, and access to financial infrastructure that will turn that income into something they can actually use. We've also heard about the solutions that are already emerging, from PAPs to the multi-currency accounts to platforms like Flutterwave, and how these technologies can make it possible to move money across Africa. But there's still so much more to be done.
I'm hearing policy harmonization, which I think is really needed. As Adi said, she does not think that the AFCFTA's digital trade protocol is really addressing most of the issues that have been addressed. It is quite interesting for me that PAPS has been able to build systems that also help the other sub-regions plug into its system, where you've got Francophone West Africa's central bank working with PAPS to plug its 8 countries into PAPS. Brilliant, because they have their digital trade currency since June. We also have the 6 countries from the Francophone Central African region. They have their own central bank. They have also been plugged into the PAP system. I think one of the first regions to have plugged into the PAP system was West Africa, because I do remember that Ghana and Nigeria had a sandbox program where they tested the swap system, and I think the test went successfully. There is East Africa that has also plugged into it. What I really don't know about is how our North African counterparts are, communicating with PAPS. But I know that PAPS is also headquartered in Cairo, and so that must be something that would have been very easy to do, with Egypt being one of the largest economies in Africa and the largest economy in North Africa. I'm sure it's something that has already been done, and I'm sure our representative from PAPS will clarify that.
Yes, most definitely. But now I would like for us to really consider what a truly integrated African digital and creative economy should look like. We've spoken to these individuals who are really at the center of this innovation, of this infrastructure. But now, honestly, as today is International Youth Day, I cannot think of anyone who's better placed to speak on today's theme, which is different context, common aspirations. Nobody understands that shared aspiration more than the leadership of Africa's youth movement. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bening Ahmed Wisishan, Secretary General of the Pan-African Youth Union.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me start off by extending a happy International Youth Day to everyone here and everyone listening from Burundi. We're currently in Burundi, marking the 5th Continental Dialogue on Youth, Peace and Security. And this team couldn't have come at an appropriate time and coincide with what we're doing here, because our shared aspirations as a continent is only realizable in a stable, peaceful climate. And if you look at everything that's happening around our continent today, we are birthing new frameworks every day. We are adopting new policies every time, and in a bid to build a progressive, stable, and prosperous Africa. But these can only happen with a peaceful continent, a continent that the guns are silenced, a continent where young people can move across the continent and bring their ingenuity to bear on the development and progress of Africa. Now, I want to look at this particular conversation from 2 points. And the first point is that this continent has been speaking about regional integration and Pan-Africanism for well over 60 years. And the aspirations of the African We have common aspirations across. If you go to West Africa, from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, where we have an incident of insurgency and insecurity, and you move all through to Ghana, Togo, Benin, or you go to Cameroon, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, the aspirations of citizens of Africa are the same. Now, how do we realize these shared aspirations? The African Union Agenda 2063 encapsulates all these aspirations into one document. And what is it that we are supposed to do? A continent whose development is built on collectivism, a continent whose development trajectory is defined by its citizens. And often when we speak about this, you find that we banded around these figures, how much natural resources we have, the demographic dividend that we envisage to leverage on. But clearly, the wealth of Africa is not just in these rhetorics. The wealth of Africa is in the right investment, and the right investment in the right demographic, which are the young people of this continent, 75% of which 35 years and below. And so when we talk about the shared aspirations of the continent, it must also be a conversation that we have about how are our governments, how is the multilateral system, how is the international community redirecting investment in building the skill set that's required to drive our common aspirations. Now, the differences of our continent does exist. The differences in the world does exist. But there's one thing that we can all agree, that Africa is the present of the world. And whether people like it or not, you will have a continent that by 2050, 1 in every 4 persons walking on the face of the earth will be African. That means that the sustainability of the world is anchored on the decisions that will be made today in Africa. The sustainability of the world is going to be defined by the actions that we take as Africa. But that does not mean that we have it all. It means that we need the right leadership. It means that we need the right mindset. It means that we need to make the right choices. I was listening to the colleagues from Flutterwaves and PAPS, and that's one thing that it conveyed across, that Africa may not just be sitting idle. Africa may be taking certain actions, but those actions must be commensurate with the aspirations of our population and the dynamics that exist. And so I want to start off by saying that this continent needs a leadership that focuses attention on building human resource capacity to be able to harness the natural resources that we have. And the foremost natural resource that we have is the youthful population that we have. The second point that I would make in our attempt to address this conversation, Africa has a development funding deficit of about $1.6 trillion. Now, what it means is that we need to mobilize more and additional resources in order to be able to fund our development. Now, if you look at the global multilateral system and everything that's happening, it means that the policy on fundraising or mobilization must be tailored toward domestic resource mobilization. Now, how do you domestically mobilize resources to fund your aspirations, your development aspirations, when the majority of your citizens are unemployed, are underemployed, and do not have the requisite skills and abilities to transform your natural resources into the essential commodities and goods and services that you require? You cannot develop or drive your aspirations without that. And so we need to be able to mobilize resources domestically. Now, to mobilize these resources domestically, your young people are your domestic resource, the foremost domestic resource that you have, because the productive your citizens are, the more resources you are able to mobilize. And so that's one of the things that I believe we need to focus attention on. The third thing that I think that we need to focus attention on, if we really need to be able to achieve our shared aspirations and build a progressive Africa we want, is how do we transform our natural resources into value-added commodities, goods, and services? And then the fourth thing, how do we fast-track the integration of the continent so that a young man in Abidjan will not need to go through the stress of getting a visa to go to Gabon, so that a young man living in Congo DRC will not need to go through the stress of getting into South Africa or into Angola or into Mali or Burkina Faso. So we need to break down the barriers in order for us to be able to achieve these shared aspirations that we envisage. Now, when we speak about the resource potential of those continents, you will find that we have gold, we have cocoa, we have diamonds, we have cobalt, we have iron and steel. How useful are these commodities to us if they keep going out of the continent in their raw state? At the end of the day, we are exporting jobs and creating unemployment within the continent. At the end of the day, we are exporting the quality of life of the African to Europe, to the Chinese, and the Indians, and to the Americas. And therefore, emphasis must be placed on building systems that allow us to utilize our natural resources in the most judicious way, which is foremost adding value to it. The fifth point that I want to mention when we speak about our common aspirations is how do we, in an attempt to address all the challenges that we have as a continent, how do we put in place systems that are a check mechanism on the judicious appropriation of our resources? We get the statistics every now and then. $90 billion getting out of the continent per annum on the basis of illicit financial outflows. Why is that happening? How do we plug that? How do we address the challenge of illicit financial outflows on the continent? And then the final point that I would mention, if we are supposed to achieve these results, building institutions that are capable of addressing the challenges that we are confronted with. Now, if you look at some of the impediments to the mobility of goods and services, the challenges of trade within the continent, which is what the payment systems are supposed to address. But that by itself is just 1% of what needs to be addressed. We've been speaking about building the Africa Customs Union for so many years. It doesn't exist, even within ECOWAS itself. When you produce a commodity in Ghana, or you produce a commodity in Burkina Faso, or you produce a commodity in Benin, Togo, Nigeria, it needs to go through very cumbersome bureaucratic and administrative processes before they can even get into a country within the same region. We need to address that, and also be able to have a continent that understands that to achieve these shared aspirations, that we need interconnectivity. I mean, from ECOWAS, there's this conversation that was started so many years back of building the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. Why are we focusing attention on building a road other than a rail line? And what informs the decision to build a road from Lagos to Abidjan other than putting in place a railway line from Lagos to Abidjan in terms of the viability of that? And so it's important for us to begin to look outside the box as a continent. It's important for us to begin to adopt our own mechanisms. And to adopt our own mechanisms, it means we need to progressively be independent, be more dependent on ourselves, and be more inward looking in terms of how we appropriate our resources. We have a sad situation on the continent where resource-rich countries like Nigeria, Congo DRC, would turn to a country like France or Belgium or Norway to fund healthcare within their countries. Whilst, in fact, if you take a country like Belgium has no single mineral resource under its soil. It depends largely on the DRC to fund itself. Why would an African country therefore move to a country like that to ask for aid to fund healthcare within their countries? It all amounts to the fact that whilst we may have all the lofty and beautiful ideas, we fail to plan. Our leadership failed to put in place the right frameworks and institutions that will address the challenges that confront us. And let me conclude by saying that the young people of this continent are willing to stay on the continent, work for the prosperity and our shared aspirations. The young people of this continent are not interested in dying in the Mediterranean and crossing into Europe. The desperation to do that is because we lack the institutions and the systems. It's because we lack the leadership that should drive processes. And it's important that leadership understands that our shared aspiration as a continent is anchored on the sense, will be anchored on the sense of ingenuity of our young people, and for the right systems, the right institutions, and the right funding made available to address the challenges that we sing of every now and then. And so this team couldn't have been better on international youth today. At the time that there's a deeper fracturing of multilateralism, at the time that Africa is beginning to be conscious of the biases of the global financial architecture, at the time that the continent is beginning to understand that in very critical situations, we are on our own, and that until we begin to forge closer collaborations and synergies amongst ourselves, until such a time that our governments and institutions open up the borders and allow young people across the 54 countries on the continent begin to interface and interact among themselves, that they are able to move their skills, their ingenuity across borders, that this continent would be that eagle that can all live like chicken and die. More enough resources, more than enough capability, more than enough human resource to be able to drive ourselves into prosperity. But to do this, to realize the aspirations of Agenda 2063, we need a continent that begins to develop confidence in ourselves and in our own products and in our own institutions. We need a continent that begins to decolonize the educational system and begin to train our citizens in a way that allows them to focus attention on the beneficiation of our natural resources and true value addition. True value addition. So I want to end here, and also just to wish everyone again a happy International Youth Day. And I hope that together we can build a progressive, peaceful, and resilient Africa we want. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Owisi-Shaun, for those incredible reflections on today's International Youth Day. You've brought us back to a very fundamental point, which is that if Africa is to realize these shared ambitions, it requires peace, stability, leadership that understands the needs of its youth, and informed systems that make this integration possible. We've also heard about how PAPs and systems like Flutterwave are already helping to build those connections, linking markets across West Africa, East Africa, and the Francophone regions, and making it easier for different currencies to work across borders. So the question now becomes, what happens when we take that ambition and apply it to Africa's creative economy? How do we move from having extraordinary creative reach to building sustainable enterprises? And how can Africa's single market help creators turn their ideas, audiences, and talent into businesses that can scale across the continent? This brings us to our next panel discussion, From Creative Reach to Sustainable Enterprise, Monetizing Africa's Creativity Through Africa's Single Market. I will be moderating this panel discussion, so let's welcome our panelists. Our very first panelist is in the person of Mrs. Teresa IYD, the Chief Executive Officer of Chatterhouse Productions Limited. Our second panelist, who needs no introduction, Mr. Maoli Gavor, actor, producer, and entrepreneur that I've had the pleasure of working with on multiple productions. Miss Adoyobi Joseph, Nigerian digital marketer and expert with many, many years of experience globally. And last but certainly not least, Miss Dorina Amina Abubakar, producer, programmer, and creative industry strategist, and the head of the Africa Creative Television Initiative that I was very lucky to recently be an alumni of. Welcome. I'm going to start with Mrs. IYD. Mrs. IYD, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, you've had a front row seat to the business of African entertainment. When you look across music, film, fashion, gaming, digital content, and design, where do you personally see the biggest commercial opportunities emerging from African creatives?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. Very interesting conversations that we are having today, and I'm glad to hear all the attempts to solve some of the great problems that we've had as creatives working across Africa. And I would like to engage further with the executives who spoke to see how we can really actualize what they are, the things they're discussing, because from where I sit, they still sound a lot like theory to me. So basically, I've had the privilege of spending almost 3 decades working in Ghana's creative and events ecosystem. And one thing I've learned is that Africa never lacks creativity, and I think that has been made really clear. What we have lacked is infrastructure around the creativity. The systems that allow an idea, a song, a fashion label, a festival, or even a film or digital property, or an event like what I do, to travel across Africa, generate revenue, and retain intellectual property, and create sustainable businesses. At Chatterhouse, we have produced thousands of experiences across music, entertainment, corporate events, conferences, festivals, and brand activations. And what that experience has shown me is that the audience is already Pan-African. And we aspire to be Pan-African, but the business infrastructure within which we work is still heavily local, or should I say national, not international. And this is the gap that I believe that this conversation can fill. Now, speaking specifically to your question, I think that the biggest opportunity it's not necessarily in creating more content. We're already producing an extraordinary amount of content. The bigger opportunity is in building businesses and intellectual property around our content. We have to stop thinking about the creative product as something that is consumed just once. For example, a song can become a concert. It can go on to become a festival. It can go on to become a brand collaboration, merchandise, licensing opportunities, a documentary, digital experience, and ultimately an export. What comes to mind is some of the big hits that we've had coming out of Ghana. For example, we had the Azonto movement. Was a big thing that came out of Ghana. But how could we have commercialized it across Africa is the question that a lot of us were asking. Currently, we have a big craze that came up with the World Cup, which was the Kakalika, the Kakalika song that everybody was kind of doing this, with the World Cup. How could we have commercialized that across Africa? So those are the kind of questions that come to mind. A fashion designer can move from selling garments locally to building a Pan-African brand. A filmmaker can move beyond one film to building a whole series of intellectual property. And an event can move beyond a one-night event into an annual property with sponsors, media rights, tourism, merchandising, and everything to take advantage of international audiences. And that's something that we have experienced personally at Chasa House, when we created platforms such as the Ghana Music Awards and the Miss Malaika and other properties. The real value was not simply the event that happened on the particular night. It was basically value building in recognizing a property, an audience, a brand, and building a community, as well as the IP that could continue to create value. So I see enormous opportunity in creative IP, in live entertainment, in digital distribution, fashion, gaming, music licensing. We're talking about content creation, tourism, and basically the intersection of between creativity and brands, because creativity doesn't move on its own. It moves within the corporate environment as well. But the critical word here is scale. So far, I think that is our biggest challenge. How do we scale what we're doing across the continent? How do we see ourselves as working across Africa and not just within particular countries? For example, an African creative entrepreneur should not have to think only about Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, but we should be thinking like, how do we build something that can travel across 54 countries? And that is where basically this single market conversation becomes really transformational. And those are the opportunities that I see in the horizon.
Certainly. Now, Mauli Gavo, I would like to come to you. Mrs. Oyode has discussed the industry at an institutional level. Now, much of this, as she has already said, sounds like theory, much of what we've discussed. But in creating value, in scaling up, in sort of partnering with these brands, before we can reach a point where we can truly scale up, we have to understand the realities on the ground. Now, as a creative professional whose career has moved between different African markets, what would you say are the practical realities of trying to build a Pan-African creative career?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's been an interesting discussion so far. I think with what everyone has shared, it's obvious that we all know what the problems are, and I think hopefully we're all trying to put together practical measures to actually take us forward. From my perspective as an actor, as an event organizer, from my perspective, the only thing that should be the focus on right now is deciding how best that we can see each other without it becoming too much of a cost to us. I say this because across all the things that I do, whether it's film or the events, there's a production, for instance, that we want to do in Nigeria, but we would love to have people from Kenya, from South Africa, from Tanzania, someone from Ethiopia maybe, so we can all come together and shoot. But the reality is the flight logistics and even just between visas and everything makes it, I wouldn't say impossible, but it makes it almost not worth the time. And I personally believe that as long as we can find ways for, at the very least, us to experience each other, which means that Ghanaians can experience Ethiopians, or because that's what I've experienced being able to travel around the continent. Every time I go to a different continent, I was just in Ethiopia, and I see so much of what we can learn from each other, just with how they're doing things differently. There's things that they're doing that are miles ahead of what we're doing here in Ghana, and there's things that we're doing that I believe that they could also learn from. So for me personally, as from the perspective of just being able to do cross-culture or cross-border interactions, without that infrastructure of being able to figure out how do we actually make it across? How is somebody from Lagos going to fly to Accra without having to pay? In December, sometimes it's $1,000. That is madness. But we are dealing with it at the moment, and I do believe that if these are the issues that we can address, hopefully it makes it easier. The solutions will start to present themselves. So
certainly, that I think is the crux of why we're here today. Now, Miss Adobe Joseph, we've discussed a lot of the barriers that we currently have. And we've discussed what it means to even build an audience and how a lot of the time that is not enough. Someone like Maoli, who has a lot of experience in the film industry, who has a lot of connections, is still finding it difficult to put together the right team of individuals from across the continent. You personally understand what it means to have an audience across various demographics, and you understand what can separate a creator from their audience because of all these barriers that exist. But how does a creator who has already been able to build an audience across boundaries turn that into a business? Because at this point, if we have an audience, if we have connections, and that is still not enough to turn that into monetary value, then what are we really doing?
Yeah. One thing we should understand is that views or audience on, let's say, YouTube does not equal money. I think there's many creators think that when they have enough audience, enough views, that they are going to make a lot of money. It doesn't work like that, because it depends on the quality of audience that you're actually building. Let's assume that you are into entertainment niche. Most of them come and watch your entertainment and they keep it going. So I think creators, on the part of creators, we should try to build quality audience and, create a personal kind of a good relationship with our audience. And again, I think that if you have audience, there are so many ways to monetize them instead of just depending on ad revenue when it comes to YouTube now. So many creators depend only on ad revenue. I think creators should explore other means of monetizing their audience, like selling digital products. Because when I started making content online, I was trying to learn how to make faceless content very well. And I found out that so many Africans did not have like a course or a coaching program that they do to help others learn what they already know. So as a creator, as a filmmaker, there are so many people that want to learn from you. You have to have a program, a course, a coaching program that could help others learn. And by doing this, you are going to get paid. And I also think that so many creators are not aware of other means of making money in all this platform, like affiliate marketing, sponsorship, is a thing. Most people that do this, like the Westerners, they make a lot of money from their affiliate link, their sponsorship, and so many of them. So we should not just depend on ad revenue, we should explore other means of making money with our audience while building authentic audience that can actually generate us income.
That's a very interesting perspective, one that I fear a lot of creators might take some issue with, because a lot of the time the driving force for the work that we do is the art itself, and constantly being told that the art itself will not ever be your sole source of income can be a very disheartening thing to hear. Now, you mentioned coaching programs, and I think that segues very nicely into our next panelist. Oh, hello? Into our next panelist, Ms. Dorina Amina Abubakar. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you are the head of the Africa Creative Television Program, and you've understood the importance of creating systems where creatives, specifically in the film and television industry, can get the necessary training that they need, as well as opportunities for coaching. But so far, you've heard three very distinct sides of the equation. But ultimately, would you say that this is an individual creator problem or an ecosystem problem? Or is it both? Do we... Okay.
Who did your question?
Don't worry, we will... Now, Miss Ayode, let me return to you. A lot of people will say that, as we've just addressed, while we're focusing on a lot of the streams of income that we think we understand, of monetization, of ticket sales, of concert sales, would you say that we might still be leaving money on the table as far as not fully exploring the full range of our creativity and how we can monetize it on the continent?
Sorry about that. Sorry. I've had to do that muting. Yes. So yes, we are leaving money on the table. Yeah. I think that in all the conversations that we have been held so far with the people leading policy, etc., we haven't had any clear conversation on intellectual property. And I think that is something we need to be able to talk about. I'm not an IP expert, so I cannot speak to that, but we create the content, and often than not, we do not fully understand, and we also do not protect or commercialize the rights attached to it. So I think that that's a conversation I would ask APN to really take on, this issue of IP protection across Africa as we plan to scale. The second would be distribution. We have incredible African content, but distribution across Africa markets is still fragmented. If there's a way we could, create a distribution network or system that enables us to access other African markets quickly, instead of each producer trying to find their own way. If there was a way, it could be an aggregation platform for Africa, because currently most of the platforms that we are using are the ones built for the global world, basically. So distribution, if we had an African distribution system for creative content, that would also be a great opportunity to make more money. And the third would be obviously mobility. Mobility is extremely difficult. I heard Mr. Maoli Gavo talking about movement of people across Africa. I've had that challenge in the past where my company was organizing an event in Sao Tome and Principe. We've done events in neighboring West African countries. Movements is pretty a bit cumbersome, but fairly easier because of the ECOWAS protocol. But try doing something across other parts of Africa where you have to move logistics, and it's hell. We had to organize a big conference in Sao Tome and Principe for the government, and it took us 3 months to move people and logistics in and out, and a hell of a lot of money in the process. So mobility is definitely an area we need to look at. And then, of course, we could also be looking at commercial partnerships. Commercial partnerships, that is basically who owns what, who earns from it, who has the rights, who can license it, and who can take it into another market. So there's a lot of money to be made, and a lot currently being left on the table through this by the lack of these issues I've raised. For me, that's a shift that we need to make from basically celebrating our creativity to actually commercializing our creativity.
Very well. Now, I understand that Dorina has rejoined us. Now, Dorina, I don't believe anyone else on this panel quite understands this mobility issue as you do. We recently wrapped up the directing workshop for the ACTV, which involved participants from South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana, hosted here in Accra. And so you might have a deeper understanding of the issues that arise when trying to conduct programs like this involving people from across the continent. Once again, my question to you is, do you think that a lot of our issues that we're facing here is ultimately an individual creator problem or an ecosystem problem? And if it is an ecosystem problem, what are the specific issues that you have personally run into?
Absolutely. Well, thank you first of all for having me today. It's so great to be here and to engage in this conversation about really moving things forward. To start, to answer, your question, I would say there are so many issues that we are dealing with. Things are a bit harder on the continent. Having just produced an entire workshop and masterclasses and an entire creative economy summit recently, as you mentioned, bringing in people from all over the continent. Certainly, transportation is huge. Just being able to fly people in, as Mawili said, is quite difficult. The fact that people have to fly from South Africa, the western part of South Africa, to East Africa, then to come to West Africa is quite difficult. Nevertheless, I do feel as though we are living in an age where we are more connected than ever before, thanks to being, mobile first consumers. I think that having convenings such as this, attending workshops, really starts the conversation. What I've seen is people coming together from different cultures to talk about their issues and to talk about actual next steps, which has been really, really, really wonderful. I think back to your question about ecosystem versus creator, it's definitely both. I think the ecosystem is very fragmented and fractured, as mentioned by everyone on this panel. But at the same time, I think we have creatives who are still adapting to the new way of making content and monetizing off of it. I think a lot of my work is sort of educating people on commercial endeavors, commercial literacy, really. I think that creatives often think that they don't need the business elements, but in the world we're living in right now, if you want anything that you've made to be seen, you have to be thinking about the business side too. So I think it is really educating people on IP, It is literally the biggest asset that one has at this time. Utilizing your IP across formats. I think that a lot of creatives often pick one format, like I'm just going to become a feature film director, when the opportunity is rather in multiple formats. Potentially having a micro series that's doing well, that has been licensed exclusively to one platform, while also developing a long form content on a different platform. Having multiple ways of monetizing is what is going to keep creatives sustainable long term. I also think that utilizing data. We on the continent have the youngest population in the entire world, yet we still don't have accurate data and measurements. I think that creatives who are popular on YouTube or TikTok should really start looking into audience development and audience behavior. That data is so crucial in getting things moving. It's how we'll better understand our continent. I also think there's so many new opportunities for funding. I think that utilizing brand partnerships, as was earlier mentioned by Mrs. IYD, is really key. Tapping into niche audiences that are already built out, fandoms that have consistent, attention. Leaning into that and growing your audience and community is the best way forward. So I think that, yes, it is creatives learning the new way that the business is trending, and also the ecosystem that needs to be supported on a policy end as well. I do think that this is, again, the best time for Africa, because as someone who lives in America, the American system is completely restructuring, would be a very nice way of putting it. African creatives no longer need the West for validation for anything. We have everything we need right here on the continent. And I think people need to be more empowered in that. So that's a big part of my work. I hope that answered your question.
It most certainly did. And I couldn't agree more. As creators, we are constantly required to evolve with the changing tides of our industry. Now, Maoli, you of all people understand the need to be versatile and for multi-formatting in our line of work. Dorina is right, with over 75% of Africa's sort of demographic being young people. We're often told as creatives that we need to move in order to find the right opportunities, that we either will not be able to find it in our own country, but rather in another African country or in a completely different continent altogether. Would you say that is the biggest sort of barrier in finding opportunity as an actor, as a content creator, as a producer, or as an event organizer? Would you say that the barrier is moving to where the opportunity is, or getting paid, or actually being able to scale the opportunity into a business?
I mean, as someone who's had to move, I think 3 times in the last 3 years, I think the only barrier is your willingness, if I'm being honest. There's 2 things that you can do. You can wait for the infrastructure around you to be built. You can wait for the opportunities to be worked, so hopefully some of them will come your way. Or you might have to go to where the opportunities are and look for them over there. And this is what you see everywhere. If people feel like they want to be heavy in tech, they might move towards the Silicon Valley side, or they might move to San Francisco. Or if you wanted to, do something in sports, you might have to move to a particular country. I myself had to move to Nigeria for 6 years, 5 years actually, 5.5. Not necessarily by choice, but the level of production that was going on in Ghana simply wasn't enough to sustain what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be in a space where there was a bit more going on, and I would be able to leverage that to my advantage. Now I live in South Africa, where it's the same idea, the same objective. Because at the end of the day, as we are continuing to build and as we're continuing to put things together, we also don't have the luxury of just waiting around. So the main obstacle is not whether you're able to do it. Anyone can do it. It's about whether you're willing to do it, or whether you see it as something that is worth the risk. It's not necessarily advisable for everybody to just suddenly move countries, but there's a reason when people want to study, sometimes they go to the UK for 4 years, and then when you're done, then you come back. So it is inconvenient, but it seems to be, as they say, the game is the game. And it seems to be a part of what we need to do in order to achieve the goals within the timeline or within the time frame that we think it's acceptable to achieve our goals. Or we can sit around and wait and see if our leaders and everybody else will do the things that we hope that they're going to do. But until then, for me, that's just my personal opinion. I believe that if there's an opportunity that will further what you're doing in a different area, because at the end of the day, we are one. So whether I live in Nigeria, whether I live in South Africa, whether I live in Ethiopia, or whatever it is, I truly believe that we are one continent. The same way we have people from Nigeria living in Ghana and from everywhere. So I don't think we should be afraid to cross borders in order to work and engage over there, because I've been to about maybe 16 African countries, I believe, by now. And I enjoy traveling in Africa way more than I enjoy traveling anywhere else in the world right now, more than Europe, more than America, anywhere else, because it's ridiculous just how vast and diverse this whole community that we have is. So I personally don't see anything wrong with saying, hey, listen, I'm from Ghana, but I'm going to move to Ethiopia for 3 years and I'm going to learn how they do whatever it is over there. And then, of course, I believe we should always find our way back home. But there are no real obstacles to moving outside of whether you think you're willing to do it or not. But yes, that's my personal opinion. Nobody has to leave their country if they don't want to. But if you have to, it is what it is.
Interesting. I mean, a few people might argue that there are quite a few obstacles in moving across borders in Africa. But yes, I couldn't agree more. I think that the future of our creative industry is in the collaborative power that we do have. The more we continue to cross those borders and to bridge the gap between our audiences and our various industries. Now, I would like to carry the conversation on back to Miss Joseph. Now, if I was let's say I was a 23-year-old content creator watching this right now, what would you say are the top 3 things I should be doing if I want my audience to become an asset as opposed to a number? You mentioned earlier on that a lot of content creators, especially on YouTube, don't really understand the business side of things, or they don't really understand how to turn those viewership numbers into actual monetization.
When you create a quality good content that is educating, especially, people, your audience will somehow relate to you more and will always come back to learn from you. And when someone comes to you when they need help, you are definitely a part of them. So the way to grow your audience to a quality audience that could literally make you money is to be honest with them. If you have a life story, let's assume that your niche is how to save money. If you have things that you did that really helped you in that aspect, you should tell them. You should be honest about your earning and your loss in that aspect. So you have to be very transparent with your audience. You have to give them value anytime they come across your content. Even if you're making entertainment content, you can still give value in one way or the other. You can even organize like a free programs that can help them grow in that aspect. So as a creator, do not just offer your audience just entertainment and let them go. Impact their life in ways that they did not even see it coming. Because if you give them impact, they will definitely come around all the time when they need help. So I think it just comes to value, giving value, making quality content. That's the way to gain valuable audience and audience that you can eventually monetize at the end of the day.
Definitely. I agree that creating events around your content is definitely a viable way of sort of scaling up your creativity. Now, Mrs. Ayode, I would like to come back to a point that you made earlier on about intellectual property. Now, of course, anybody can have a successful entertainment event or a successful channel on YouTube, or create content, films that people connect with. But how does one go from a successful event or a successful brand to an enduring piece of intellectual property?
Well, so basically, one has to always think about what you are building, because I know usually it starts from a place of passion. The creative process always starts from a place of passion, where you have an idea, you have this light bulb moment, and you quickly want to jump into execution. And so you don't really think far. You think you're just thinking in the moment of what you want to do. So one thing you need to know is that, I mean, a successful event is basically just a moment. One post or engagement with an audience as a digital creator is just a moment. It's just a successful engagement. But the question is, how do you turn that into a valuable intellectual property that will create and turn it from a movement into an asset that can continue to generate value the moment it's over? So we want to start thinking that way. How do I turn this thing I'm doing into an asset that can continue to generate value after this particular moment? And that is where the IP comes in. The distinction is very important. When we produce an event, we have to ask ourselves from the beginning, what are we building? Is it simply an event that happens on Saturday night? Or we are building a property that has a name, a brand, a story? A storytelling is very important. And I think the lady who spoke before, Adobe, talked about being authentic in your presentation and your engagement. So what story are you telling? Who's the audience? The content, the sponsorship opportunities, the merchandise, the media opportunities, and the potential for it to travel beyond where you are. So here's a suggestion about creating events even out of your content creation. Is one of such ways of turning it into an IP. And that's one of the lessons that we have learned over the years. For example, the Ghana Music Awards is not valuable simply because there is an award ceremony every year. It has become a platform around which music, artists, brands, the media, the fans, fashion, production, content, and the wider business industry and entertainment industry can interact around. And that helps you build a strong IP. That's when an event becomes an economic asset rather than simply an occurrence. And so I think that African creatives need to be encouraged, or I would like to encourage African creatives to be able to think that way much earlier. I think the first wave of digital content creation has happened. It's happened through passion, by chance, and all of that. But the next wave should be more, it should go beyond how many people watched, how many people attended, to be what did I build that I own? And that is where the IP comes in. So you build and you own.
Absolutely. Before I go to my next couple of questions, we actually have a few comments from our chat box section. Our very first comment from MD Kwamiche is, there have always been forces behind the scenes resisting the growth and development of the continent and the content. and its people. And unless we, the people, stand up united and say enough is enough, we'll keep marking time. A second comment from Abuaje Daniel is that STEM education is the way to go. I'll read a few more comments before we go back in. Our next one from Nana Aka to everyone is, Africa doesn't need another platform. Africa needs better data. Now, we'll address that in a moment, but my next question, directed at both Dorina and Maoli, is, yes, we can speak all day, every day about the importance of turning your art into a viable IP. But I think a lot of us creatives will agree that that is easier said than done. We'll start with you, Dorina. What do you think the limitations or the obstacles are in doing so?
I think it's twofold. Certainly, I think creatives, in my experience, and especially myself as a creator, are not able to sort of think outside of the bubble of their project. So I think they're thinking, okay, I've created this TV series, I've got all these characters, that's it, that's great, it'll just be distributed. But it's so much bigger than that, as has been mentioned. I think it's really leaning into the live events. There are so many opportunities to grow your IP beyond just that one format. I think that distribution obviously is the biggest issue. It's sort of like, why pour so much in to a project if there's no finish line, if there is no distribution? But I would say it's organic. As your project grows, there is more opportunity for more financing, and more opportunity for your project itself to just expand. I also think people need to realize that they themselves are brands. They themselves are IP. I take Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey as an example. People are not really going to see The Odyssey. They're going because it's Christopher Nolan's work. So I think that it's sort of reducing the anxiety around growing your project, and knowing that there will be distribution at the end of the line. It just depends on how you've strategized. I hope that answers it.
It most certainly does. I often don't go to see a Christopher Nolan movie simply because of the concept or because of the synopsis, but I go because, again, it's a Christopher Nolan movie. You know what you're going to see, you know what to expect, and you're going for his unique brand of storytelling. Now, Maoli, the same question applies to you. What are some of the sort of boundaries and obstacles that you yourself have faced when trying to turn your art into an IP?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think everyone is trying to make the best out of what the system is currently giving us, because it's not necessarily up to us a lot. The big brands came in. Amazon was here for some time. Netflix was here for some time. They had their investments, and then I believe Amazon pulled out first. They've not pulled out per se, but they've reduced what they were doing before. Hulu and the rest tried to enter the market, and I think everybody is still deciding how they feel. So while we wait for them to make their own decisions, I believe somebody on here mentioned that it would be great to find a way to do, at the very least, the first level of distribution has to be some sort of local infrastructure that will survive regardless of whether Netflix is going to acquire it, or Mnet or Amazon Prime is going to take it. At the end of the day, that at the very least secures our own industry without being reliant on whether this film has been put on this international platform and then people are watching it, because end of the day, we're the ones supposed to be consuming our own content more than anybody else before we expand it. We hear about Chinese films, we hear about Indian films and everything, but we don't know 95% of them, because at the end of the day, those people in China and India are the majority of the ones who consume it. And then whatever goes outside, goes outside. We're happy for that, but we should be more concerned about which Africans are consuming our own African content, as opposed to which Americans are getting to watch our show, or whichever nation. If they get to watch it, that's absolutely fantastic. It speaks to something similar. Like I have a production company, but in Ghana, for instance, if you wanted to do a feature film, we have 2 cinemas in the entire country, and I'm not even exaggerating. There's 2 major ones, one at West Hills and then the one in Accra. Of course, there's a few screens here and there, but there's no MX, there's no really big screen, there's no big distribution system that's available. So even if you produced your film over here, who are you going to give it to? How many cinemas are you going to show it in that you're going to make the money back? How many people are going to lease it that you'll even break even remotely? But if we created our own infrastructure where we didn't need the big platforms, or we have a local infrastructure where whether we're doing coordinated viewings in different screens across the city or across the country, there's no reason why people in the north, people in the central region shouldn't also be consuming some of the same content or whether some of the same films that we're doing. So I believe more, which is back to my earlier points, in just figuring out our own solutions, and then at whatever point that the big corporations or the outside world wants to come and whether it's help or invest or whatever, fantastic for them. But until then, we can definitely figure something out for ourselves that doesn't require validation from anybody else. So it wouldn't matter whether we've been nominated for an Oscar or a Grammy or whatever it is. Those shouldn't be the metrics by which we validate whether what we're doing here has merit or not. It's our own product, and we can definitely consume it by ourselves without needing anybody else. So I do believe there's obstacles in terms of we have to wait for Netflix to decide whether they're going to buy or whatever. But I don't think these are obstacles that cannot be surmounted, because we're more than capable of creating our own internal infrastructure, our own internal distribution infrastructure, especially because then we get to control the pricing. And even if it becomes very low, we can definitely find a way. We're not going to be making millions like Netflix is going to be giving us, but it at least gives us a base platform to survive on while we wait for the other things. And I just believe in doing what we can with what's available to us rather than just sit around and wait.
Absolutely. I've always said that distribution is one of the key barriers in our growing film, television, and music industry here in Ghana. I mean, you're absolutely right. Even across the country, how many cinemas do we really have? I mean, there is Golden Eagle in Kumasi, and we really only have 2 properly functioning larger scale cinemas here in Accra, which is at the West Hill Mall and at the Accra Mall, and that is simply not enough. I was in Nigeria this past May promoting a film that I had starred in, and the difference was so jarring and so vast. They have IMAX cinemas, they have multiple cinemas, but all functioning at a very high level, all within a single state, let alone multiple states. And when you see the difference in understanding how distribution has a role to play in the industries, we realize just how far behind we are and why that is. Now, you're absolutely right. We should not be waiting for the West to validate our work. We should not be waiting for Netflix or Amazon to buy our IP or our projects in order for us to make money or for us to get it across the world. I'm going to address this question to you, Miss IYD. Now, when it comes to distribution in Ghana, we have very few options. Why do you think more people are not understanding the need to expand on those distribution options? Why do you think people who are investing in film, because that's not to say that we don't have anyone investing in film, but those that are don't understand that that is where their investments need to go if they're going to see any real output or return on their investment?
This conversation really is something that's really dear to my heart, because this particular topic about and it's a question of investments in the creative economy, in the sectors and areas for investment. And sometimes I am a player in the industry, so I, having worked in the industry for about 3 decades, I see where the gaps are, and we try as a company to step in and address some of these gaps, which will also make us work more effectively and efficiently and, be more productive as a creative agency. For example, I'll get to the bit about film, but in my key area of interest is events. What we have done back in Ghana is to invest in event venues because we realized that there was a huge gap for large event venues. And we started initially by advocating. Whenever we had a chance to meet with government agencies or the ministers or government authorities, we would advocate for large investment in large event venues because we knew what could be achieved with that. And that was very pertinent to the growth of our industry. And after having spoken about it for a while, and we asked ourselves, who are we waiting? If not us, then who? One of the ways in which we felt we're able to move the industry forward. The same applies to the various value chains in the various creative industries. If you go to fashion, there's so much opportunity along the value chain that requires investment. And if you go to film, there's so much opportunity along the value chain that requires investment to unlock the opportunities. So the question is, what's happening? And yet we have our country saying they are looking for investors, they're promoting investors, but it seems that all these investments ventures are always targeted at other sectors than the creative sector. So, for example, if we went on a tour around the world looking for investors, are we going along with the creative sector as well to say that we have opportunities in setting up cinemas and we have opportunities in setting up large-scale event venues. We have opportunities in the creative sector, but I think we don't. That's what is missing. So we need more advocacy in that space. People like myself and others who are in the industry need to speak more about the opportunities inherent in our industries. I'm not a film person, but I'm appalled to hear that we have only 2 movie theaters. I mean, in Ghana, that's an area for investment. That's huge. That's a huge opportunity, And so I feel there's a lot we can do both within our countries in terms of engaging even our business communities on opportunities in the creative sector. And that's what I'll say, that we have to engage more and highlight the opportunities because in Ghana, I always say that I can only speak about my Ghana experience. In Ghana, I can always say investment seems to go in one direction at every point in time. Currently, Ghana is going through a real estate boom and it's all into apartments. High-rises building, high-rise office and private accommodation. Mixed use buildings are going up everywhere. And I keep asking myself, so why aren't event venues going up? Why aren't movie theaters going up? Why is the direction of investment all going into one direction? And then you see all these apartments are empty. They're empty, springing up everywhere. So is it the case of we are not speaking enough? We are not creating opportunities for people to understand? I have a vision of being able to create a creative industry investment summit where we can actually reach out to high net worth individuals, gather them in a room and talk to them about opportunities for investment in the creative sector. I feel that there's a knowledge gap. There seems to be a gap where we in the industry see the opportunities from the lack thereof, and then people outside of the industry don't see the opportunities. But if you look around the world, in all the countries that have been able to have advanced in their creative sectors, it has been backed by investment. You have even companies and organizations owning theaters, owning stadiums, owning movie theaters. corporates even invest, in movie theaters. You have O2 Arena, you have this, you have Kodak Theater, so there is a need to mobilize investments in our sector, and that would trickle down the various industry value chains.
There is most certainly a need to do so. Now, before we close, I'd like to put one final question to all four panelists. If Africa is to move from having incredible creative talent and global reach to building a truly sustainable creative economy within the single market, what is the one change that you believe needs to happen now? And what responsibility do each of us as creatives, industry leaders, policymakers, and businesses have in making that happen? I'll start with you, Dorina.
Okay, so I think I unfortunately will have two to answer with. The first is that from a government level, from a high level, we need to start seeing the arts as real creative economy, as something that can contribute to the GDP of our countries and our continent. So that's one, and I think that policymakers really need to take a look at the opportunities and what's available. And the second one is certainly innovation. Adapting and maybe adopting AI purely as a workflow tool, not to get in the way of creativity, but as a means of allowing things to be more accessible. I think that if we have more AI implementation, even in dubbing, even in subtitling, it will allow us to have more interconnectivity. So those are the two things I think.
Ms. Joseph? Ms. Joseph, the same question. Okay, let's go to Maoli Gavo.
So, okay, I think she's back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I think that schools and I think that schools should teach more about content and digital marketing, all of that, because I think we are not talking about it much. Schools should teach about content skill. We should treat it as a thing, because I think we are ignoring it in part of the world. There is money in this content space, and the fact that we are ignoring it is making it hard for everybody. So we should talk about it more. We should have a program that teach people about this. And again, I think that we should improve our access to internet, because it's very hard. Living in Africa is very hard when it comes to accessing internet. It's just, you will buy data and it's just finished. For a beginner, it's very hard for people to start creating content. They will be buying a lot of data and it won't be enough. So strong internet, easier access to internet is definitely going to help the upcoming creators.
Thank you very much. Maoli?
I think my only contribution would be those of us who, I know Madam Teresa said, for instance, Charterhouse, like she said, they had to ask themselves, I mean, yes, there's a problem, yes, there's a gap, but who else is going to do it if not us? They looked around and they said, well, hey, you know what? Nobody's doing it, so we'll do it. Even though we might not be able to do everything, at the very least, we'll do something. If we had 10 different people that are doing the same thing that Charterhouse is doing, we would actually see some tangible change. Because again, we want the governments to do this, but there's a lot that we've been wanting the governments to do for 60 years now. So that for me is, we pray and we hope, and we will continue to give it all to God. But that seems for me like something that is completely out of our hands. But what is within our hands are the little partnerships that we can come together. There's a reason the mafia, even though it's a criminal enterprise, is so effective. because individually sometimes things are possible, but when there's a collective that moves as a unit, it makes it pretty hard to stop. And if we had more smaller individuals who were saying, hey, listen, I might not be able to do everything, but this is how I can also contribute. Guys, let's partner. Your company, please do this. If Dorina and the African Creative TV say, hey, listen, we're going to pitch this in, and the African Prosperity Network said this is what we're also going to be able to do, and we have a consortium of people who all say, hey, listen, we're not all going to be able to do it individually, but at the very least I can provide this. Charterhouse might say, I can provide you guys a great venue to do this amazing concert. We would say we would bring this artist, Dorina would say, hey, I'm going to film it for you. Figure out an ecosystem that is internally stimulated without needing help from anybody. We don't even need, I wouldn't say we need money from outside, but again, money is always nice. But we can always start with the things that are already readily available within our hands. So I feel like, especially in Ghana, we don't do too much of it. In Nigeria, it was a lot easier for me to collaborate with people and to do things. In Ghana, we have the system of talking a lot about things, but it ends at the meeting stage. We'll form about 10 different meetings and we'll have 16 different committees to discuss the same thing, and then the idea just dies. So hopefully we can all go into execution. Anything that is available, let's actually come together and do it. If it fails, it fails. We'll move on to the next one. But hopefully more doing and less talking and just more this thing. So I look forward to that. I think everybody here has given practical solutions, and everybody here is already doing what's within their ability. So hopefully together we can all do like something fairly crazy and shock the world a little.
I can't wait for us to shock the world. And last but certainly not least, Madame Teresa Ayode, your final remarks.
So my final remarks are that, first of all, I must commend African Prosperity Network for the great job you are doing with these conversations and the dialogue and the Make Africa Borderless Now campaign. It's such a much needed campaign that needs to bring us together as Africans, especially in this time of aggregation where markets are aggregating. It's quite ironic that colonial masters, so to speak, divided us to suit their interests. And we, as the owners of the continent, have decided to hold strongly to these borders and even beginning to turn on each other, which is so sad. But if we saw ourselves as a United States of Africa, I think that our thinking would be bigger, broader, and we would not need to depend on the world for our success. If we have a good movie that sells across Africa, we don't need a Netflix. If we have good distribution channels that can aggregate our content across Africa, we don't need the world. We are fine as Africans. We have enough of a population, of a market, to take care of ourselves as Africans. We just need to have that bigger thinking, that bigger mindset, and move in one direction. So please keep doing what you're doing, and we are happy to support you any way we can in this movement. So to my final words, as someone who has worked in this industry for 30 years, I'm so passionate about the opportunities in the creative industry. And we just have to continue our advocacy as creatives whenever we have the opportunity to get the creative economy placed on a higher level and on a higher agenda on government's to-do list. I think that we are mostly uncatered for as a sector. And and even sometimes the policies that government comes out with that we applaud, there's just policies in words. We don't see it happen. We don't see it roll out. And sometimes the policies are not even funded. They don't have the funding to even roll out the policies. So then they just become words again that are just said and touted, and we celebrate them. But in terms of how do we make it work? How do we action them? So we are here to continue to advocate for the sector at the highest level we can get to. We are here to lend our support to make these policies work. And I think that what we also need to do is to begin to talk a lot about the investment opportunities in our sector so that we can attract investments in our areas, because people don't look at our sector as possible business opportunities, except you are in. It's such a, you have to be in it to know the opportunity, but how do we bring out opportunities for others to see? So that's something that we need to do more of so that we can attract more investment into our sector, not just from governments, from even private sectors, private equity funds can invest in our sector, just as they do in other parts of the world. So there's a lot of work we need to do there to attract investment. And then another thing that I would also want to say is that we always tend to look at the creative sector as the product. We look at the product and we forget the entire value chain. When we talk about the ecosystem, we've got to look at it holistically. Look at the ecosystem of we have producers, choreographers, musicians, sound engineers, lighting technicians, stage designers. Look at the full population of people in this sector, who can contribute economically to the states or to the government or to our national economies if they are fully and truly empowered. And so the advocacy just has to continue, because I'm talking about our industry is one of the most difficult industries to work in, because you say there's unemployment. There's unemployment. People are looking for jobs. In our sector, there's underemployment. You could be looking for an expert to do something, and you won't find that person in your country. You have to go looking for them from other markets. And so there's a lot of opportunity for creatives to work, but there's just this whole mismatch. And that's where I sit in terms of how do we bridge this gap between showing the value of the creative sector to everybody, so we can come together to really make it work. And so there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely.
And as Maoli said, we can achieve that through collaboration as well. We need to collaborate more, no one can tell our stories better than those of us in the sector. So let's come together and collaborate more, and together we can push and make things happen.
That is most certainly true. No one can tell our stories better than we can.
Ourselves, yeah.
Now, before we go into our closing remarks, I would like to open the floor to any of our past panelists on session 1, if you're still available, to also give some closing remarks.
Is Adi still there? I think she might have left. Is Gloria there?
Okay, well, thank you so much to our brilliant panelists for such an insightful and honest conversation. Now, what we've heard today is that Africa's creative potential is immense, but potential is not enough. Now, as we bring today's program to a close, I'd like to thank every single one of our speakers on what has been a genuinely important conversation. We began with a simple proposition. Africa's creative influence is already borderless. But what we need now is for our markets, our payment systems, our rights, framework, and mobility arrangement to finally catch up. Kwame Nkrumah said in 1963, we must unite now or perish. And today, perhaps the creative economy gives that same Pan-African ambition a very contemporary expression. We need to be able to create here, sell here, collaborate everywhere, and keep more of that value right here in Africa. And that is the journey from streams to sales. Thank you so much for joining us. I have been Princess Fathia Nkrumah, and now to officially close today's webinar, I'd like to invite again Mr. Prince Moses.
Thank you very much, Princess. You've done a fantastic job, and thank you to all our contributors, and thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties that we had earlier on. So despite the AFCFTA, our digital creatives remain hamstrung by over 50 fragmented markets, blocked payments, and weak intellectual property protection. That's what we heard. We are leaving billions on the table. We heard that as well. This is why the AFCFTA Digital Trade Protocol is our most urgent priority. It creates one continental digital market where a creator in Lagos sells to Nairobi and a studio in Cairo distributes to Accra seamlessly without borders. The Caribbean is also part of the integration agenda. Now, PAPS, that is the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, and Flutterwave, among others, are burning the midnight oil to make seamless digital transactions possible. But we need better distribution channels, as we heard, that can aggregate our content across the continent. We need networking and partnerships, as we heard again, for the creative industry. We have the numbers to make prosperity in the creative economy a reality. Policy also needs to address internet access and artificial intelligence investments. These efforts should move beyond words and translate into a real impact in the creative industry, which employs a lot of our youth. As we heard as well from the Secretary General from the Pan-African Youth Organization. We must recognize digital skills across borders, protect IP continent-wide, and build the digital infrastructure that allows our creative economy to scale. This is exactly what the Make Africa Borderless Now movement's 12 priority action points demand. You go to the website makeafricaborderlessnow.com, you should find the 12 action priority points, and they speak to our reality and our integration efforts. The creative economy is not a sideline, it is a front line. It is how we employ our youth and tell our own stories to the world. Let us unite our digital market, let us empower our creators, let us build an African digital economy that leads the world. This has been part of our Make Africa Borderless Now webinar series. To join the movement and encourage our policymakers to harmonize policies in line with African integration, I would really encourage you to visit makeafricaborderlessnow.com and sign the petition. Together we can make our single market and AU Agenda 2063 a reality. To round things off, for those of you who are not part of our mailing list, the Africa Prosperity Dialogues will be held this year next year, that is, between the 27th and 29th of January. That is for the Africa Prosperity Dialogues. And we are going to be making some fantastic presentations, which of course we are going to take to the AU to make all these discussions, all these wonderful suggestions that we've heard today from our incredible experts a possibility. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, Princess Fathia Nkrumah.
Very, very much appreciated. And of course, if you would also like to make your voice heard, please, please, please use the hashtag Make Africa Borderless Now on all social media platforms. And you can also comment on a lot of our posts regarding this specific webinar on Instagram at the Africa Prosperity Network, which is at Africa Prosperity Network. Thank you again so much for joining us on this webinar on today's International Youth Day.
Thank you.
Africa is far from people. It is Africans who are poor, not Africa. And they are poor because of the uncounted profit that has been
no dollarization, true unification. We are the biggest single market. Say no more to the colonial racket. They don't care, they never will be fair. Let's come together and grab our share. Join the fast track to prosperity. We want food and energy security till eternity. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. Do you believe? I believe in Africa. Say I believe. Oh mama, Africa. I believe in Africa. Africa. All I see. point of view. Africa will unite. Let these words sink in your head. Divide and rule is dead. All